After sitting across the table from over 80 families, I've noticed something. The people who struggle most in retirement are almost never the ones who made one big mistake. They're the ones who understood certain truths in theory, maybe even nodded along when someone said them out loud, but never actually felt them until it was too late to do anything about it. So I want to share 7 of those truths with you today. These are not tips. These are not strategies. These are things that I've watched play out with real families in real meetings over and over again. And the first one on this list is the one nobody expects to hear from a financial advisor. Truth number 1, retirement is an identity crisis disguised as a financial event. Most people spend their entire adult lives building an identity around what they do. You're the business owner. You're the provider. You're the one who keeps everything running. For 20, 30, sometimes 40 years, that's who you are. I had a client, we'll call him Tom, who had more than enough to retire by every number in his financial plan. Monte Carlo simulations, cash flow projections, they all said go. But Tom wasn't afraid of running out of money. He was afraid of running out of purpose. Tom had spent decades as a business owner. He was the guy people called. He had influence in his community. He showed up somewhere every single day because people needed him there. And now on paper, he was ready to stop. But in every conversation we had, the same question kept surfacing. Not do I have enough? It was, what exactly am I going to do? The idea of watching TV all day terrified him. Nobody asked their clients, what are you retiring to? Only, what are you retiring from? The clients that I've seen navigate this well are the ones who figured that out before they left. Maybe it's consulting part-time in the same industry. Maybe it's leading something in their church or community. Maybe it's starting the thing that they always said they'd get to someday. I actually recommend a book called Halftime to a lot of my clients because it reframes what the second half of life can look like. What I try to do in the first 6 months of a client's retirement is treat it like a test drive. We pay attention to what makes them feel good. And then you lean into those things. And we look for ways to fulfill the need for significance and influence without the 40-hour-a-week obligation or the stress that comes with it. The specific answer doesn't matter as much as having one, because retirement without purpose doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like floating. And I'll be honest with you, as a financial advisor, I used to think my job was just to make sure that the numbers worked. It took watching enough families go through this to realize that the numbers are only half of it. The other half is making sure you actually want the life that you're stepping into. But even the people who figure out the identity piece almost always get caught off guard by the next truth, because it goes against something they've believed for decades. Truth number 2, your spending doesn't go down in retirement, it just shifts. Here's a belief that almost everyone carries into retirement. Once I stop working, my expenses will go down. No more commute, no more clothes, no more lunch out. I'll be spending less. And some of that is true. But what I keep seeing with clients that catches them completely off guard, and this is actually one of my favorite things to explain because it's so counterintuitive. Think about your week right now. Which is your most expensive day? For most people, it's Saturday. You sleep in, you eat out, you run errands, you grab coffee, you end up ordering dinner. Saturday's expensive because you have time to spend. In retirement, every day is Saturday. On top of that, the first few years of retirement are the years you've been waiting for. You finally have time to take the trips you've been putting off, to do the home projects, to be present with your grandkids. That costs real money, and it should, but it's rarely what people budgeted for. We actually talk about 3 phases of retirement spending, and I think this reframe changes how a lot of people think about their plan. The go-go years. These are roughly the first 10 to 15 years of retirement when your health is good, your energy is high, and you genuinely want to experience things. This is typically your most expensive phase, and that's okay if you plan for it. The slow go years are the next 10 to 15 years. You're still active, but the pace slows. Maybe you've accomplished a lot of the bucket list items. Maybe your health has shifted slightly. Spending naturally comes down. And then the no-go years, the final chapter. Physically and emotionally, the desire to travel and do big things has slowed considerably. Ironically, these are often your least expensive years, except for one major wildcard, healthcare. Your financial plan should reflect this staggered reality because you're not going to be spending at the same rate in year 2 as you will in year 22. If you sit down and honestly price out your first 3 years of retirement, the trips, the healthcare premiums, the home projects, the family support, you'll almost always find that number is higher than the vague estimate you've been carrying in your head. And it's much better to find that out now than 18 months in when your account balance starts looking different than you expected. And that spending piece connects directly to one of the most uncomfortable truths on this list, because a big part of why spending goes up in retirement has nothing to do with you. Truth number 3, your kids will ask you for money, and saying yes every time could quietly break your plan. Nobody wants to hear this one, but I've seen it too many times to not say it. I had a client, we'll call him Steve, who found himself out of work in his late 50s. It was a tough situation, and instead of tightening the budget, he kept supporting his adult children, paying their phone bills, their car insurance, helping with down payment on houses. He was depleting his retirement savings to do it, but he couldn't say no. He loved his kids, he wanted to help, and every individual decision seemed manageable, but the cumulative effect was costing him his future. Here's the part that keeps me up at night. I've watched those same adult children years later having to step in and financially support their parents because their parents didn't protect their own retirement. What started as generosity became a burden passed to the next generation. The dollar amount you give isn't the real cost. A $500 monthly contribution to your adult child's expense might feel manageable, but over 5 years, that's $30,000. But the compounding cost, the growth you gave up by removing that money from your portfolio in your late 50s, could make the real cost significantly higher over the course of a 25-year retirement. Your kids have time. A 30-year-old who hits a rough patch has 30 more working years to recover. You might not have that same luxury. That doesn't mean you should stop helping your kids. It means you help them with a clear picture of what it costs your plan so that you're making intentional choices instead of just saying yes out of guilt. One of my clients handled this really well. She figured out a fixed monthly amount she could genuinely afford to set aside for her kids. She had the conversation with them directly. She separated that bucket completely from her retirement savings. She told me later the conversation was uncomfortable, but once she had it, she actually felt better about helping because she knew it wasn't quietly putting her own future at risk. I'm a parent. I love my children, but I also love them enough to know that they have decades to figure things out, and I don't have that same runway in my 50s and 60s. Setting limits with your kids is not selfish. It's how you make sure you can keep helping them for the long run instead of running out of the ability to help at all. If any of this is hitting close to home and you want someone to actually look at your situation with you, there's a link in the description where you can book a conversation with my team. There's no pressure, no sales pitch, just a real look at where you stand so you can walk away with some clarity on what your next step should be. While most people are focused on what they're spending, there's a quieter risk they're completely overlooking, and it's the assumption that someone or something will warn them if they're not ready. Truth number 4, nobody's going to tap you on the shoulder and tell you you're not ready. I once got a client who reached out on his 50th birthday. He said he felt like he should finally take a look and see if he was on track. When we ran the numbers, he wasn't. Not by a small margin. We had to make some significant adjustments to close the gap. And his first reaction wasn't panic, it was frustration. He said, "My 401k projection said I was fine. I talked about retirement with my HR department, but nobody told me I needed to do anything differently." He wished we would have met sooner. The plan to close the gap ended up costing more than it would have 5 years earlier because we'd lost 5 years of compounding. To close the same gap, we either had to save more aggressively or take more risk. Both of those would have been unnecessary if he had checked in earlier. There's an assumption most people carry that goes something like this. If I wasn't ready to retire, I'd know. Something would tell me. My 401k statement would look wrong. My employer would flag it. I'd feel it. But that's not how it works. Your employer is not tracking whether you're financially prepared. Your 401k statement shows you your balance, but it doesn't tell you whether that balance can support the life you want for the next 25 or 30 years. Your spouse might be carrying the same assumptions you are. And your gut feeling about whether you're ready is usually based on a number you came up with years ago that has nothing to do with what your retirement will actually cost. I've had clients walk in convinced they were 2 years from retirement. When we ran the numbers based on their actual spending, their healthcare costs, their tax situation, and their income needs, the picture looked very different than they expected. Sometimes they were closer than they thought. Sometimes the gap was significant. But almost every single time, the reaction was the same. Why didn't anyone tell me this sooner? Because nobody was going to. The only person who can answer the question, am I actually ready, is you. And the only way to answer it is to sit down and do the work. The people who looked early always had more options than the people who waited. And even for the people who do sit down and try to figure it out, there's another truth waiting for them that's just as uncomfortable. Truth number 5, the advice you followed was probably built for someone else. Most people have been following some version of financial advice their entire working life. Maybe it's the target date fund your employer selected when you first enrolled in your 401k. Maybe it's that old rule of thumb about a 10% savings rate being all you need. Maybe it's a strategy your brother-in-law swore by. The truth is, that advice wasn't necessarily wrong, it just wasn't built for you. I had a client who was smart, disciplined, and was a high earner in the 37% tax bracket who had been consistently funding a Roth 401k for years. Why? Because an article online said that Roth was better. The problem is, that advice isn't true for everyone. At a 37% tax bracket, he was paying a very high rate of tax on every dollar going into that Roth. In retirement, he'd almost certainly be in a significantly lower bracket. It would have made much more sense to take the deduction now and look at Roth conversions strategically down the road. But the article didn't know his tax bracket. He needed to hear it from someone who did. And by the time we met, he'd already paid tens of thousands of dollars in unnecessary taxes. Here's another story that really stuck with me. I had a couple come to me, both successful, household income over $800,000, and they had hired an advisor, and within 3 meetings were signed up for a sophisticated retirement plan. The projections for it looked great on paper, but nobody ever asked them about their cash flow. Nobody mapped out their actual spending. Nobody asked whether they could even fund the plan given everything else going on in their financial lives. 6 months later, they realized they couldn't make the contributions without significant financial stress. They'd already paid thousands in setup fees, and they'd lost something even more expensive than the money. They'd lost trust in anyone in the industry was actually looking out for them. The advice they followed wasn't built for their life. It was built for a category they fit into on paper. The takeaway isn't that all advice is bad. It's that advice that wasn't designed for your specific income, tax situation, family, and goals is going to miss things. Sometimes small things, sometimes very expensive things. And if you haven't asked whether the financial guidance you're currently following was actually built for your life, that's worth doing. But all of this, the identity, the spending, the kids, the readiness, the advice, all of it assumes that you'll have the health to enjoy whatever you've built. Truth number 6 is your health will shape your retirement more than your portfolio. You can have the perfect retirement plan, the right savings, the right investments, the right withdrawal strategy, all the numbers lined up exactly the way they should be. And then your health changes. I had clients who were planning for an early retirement at 55 who I met when they were in their late 40s. They had over $5 million saved and were in a phenomenal financial position. We were mapping out what a great next chapter looked like. And then the wife got sick. She started needing significant ongoing care. The cost was staggering, and it completely changed the trajectory of their retirement. Not because of anything they did wrong financially, because health is a variable no spreadsheet can fully predict. Now that's a dramatic story, but variations of it happen all the time at 65, 70, 75, and maybe it's not that extreme, but long-term care costs starting in your early 70s instead of your 90s is more common than people expect. And healthcare is often the largest expense in retirement before you even start planning for long-term care. You have Medicare premiums, co-pays, deductibles, prescription costs, supplemental insurance. It adds up in ways that genuinely shock people because they're spending their entire working life with an employer covering a significant portion of those costs. Health is a part of the plan, but this truth is about more than just the dollar costs. It's about the fact that your health determines the quality of the retirement you get to live. You can have $3 million in the bank. If your body doesn't let you enjoy it, the number doesn't matter. And the frustrating part is that a lot of the health issues I've seen derail retirement weren't sudden emergencies. They were the result of years of ignored warning signs, stress that never got managed, exercises that kept getting pushed off, checkups that got skipped because things felt fine. I'm not a doctor and I'm not here to tell you what to eat or how to work out. But I am going to tell you that what I've seen from this chair, the families who had the best retirements were not always the ones with the most money. They were the ones who treated their health like it was part of the plan. Because it is part of the plan. Your health determines how long your money needs to last, what your expenses will be, and whether the life you save for is actually the life that you get. And that brings us to the final truth on this list, the one that ties everything together. Truth number 7, the biggest cost in retirement is the decision you keep putting off. Every truth that I've shared in this video has one thing in common. They all get more expensive the longer you wait. I had a client with 3 old retirement accounts from previous jobs. One of them had been sitting in a money market fund for almost a decade, not because he chose to put it there, because he never got around to looking at it. While that account sat still, the market went through an extended period of significant growth, but his money didn't participate in any of it. And that's not a story about bad investing. That's a story about one decision that kept getting pushed to next month, and next month turned into nearly 10 years. I had another client, a self-directed investor, who had done a genuinely impressive job managing his own portfolio of about $2 million. He came in for a second opinion on a few retirement decisions he was about to make. When we looked at the full picture, we found that one of those decisions made in isolation without seeing the whole plan would have triggered a chain reaction across his taxes, his Medicare premiums, and his long-term income strategy. The cost of that one decision, if nobody had caught it, would have been tens of thousands of dollars over the course of his retirement. He'd been meaning to get a second opinion for years. He just kept putting it off. The compounding cost of waiting. The identity piece, figuring out what you're retiring to, gets harder to build the closer you get to your last day of work. The spending and understanding what retirement actually costs surprises you more at 64 than 54. The conversations with your kids and setting boundaries around money get more uncomfortable the longer you avoid them. Your readiness and knowing whether the numbers actually work only becomes clear when you sit down and look. Every year you don't look is a year where the gap either grew or the options got smaller. The advice you've been following, whether it was actually built for you, costs more the longer it stays unexamined. And your health, treating it like part of the plan, gets harder to reverse the longer you wait. It's not usually one catastrophic mistake. It's the Roth conversion you keep meaning to look into. The Social Security timing you haven't analyzed. The old accounts you haven't reviewed. The estate plan you haven't updated. The plan you keep saying you'll get to when things slow down. Every one of those decisions has a cost that goes up the longer it sits. Not because you're doing anything wrong, because time is a factor in every single one of them, and time only moves in one direction. Every family I've worked with who finally took the first step said some version of the same thing. I wish I'd done this sooner. Not because their situation was hopeless, usually the opposite. Once they could see where they stood, they felt better. They just wished they hadn't spent so many years carrying the weight of not knowing. If there's one thing I want you to take from this video, it's this. The best time to look at any of these things was years ago, but the second best time is right now. And right now is still a really good time. Those are the 7 truths I keep seeing retirees learn too late. And if you recognize yourself in a few of them, that's a good thing. It means you're seeing it now instead of 5 years from now. But knowing the truth is only half of it. If you want the full framework, the 5 specific traps that quietly derail American retirements and exactly what to do about each step, I made an entire video on that. It picks up right where this one leaves off. I'll see you in that one.